Hi everybody, my name is Sandy Boucher and welcome back to another edition of The Learning Curve. This is the show where we try to build understanding between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people in the city of Thunder Bay as well as in the area. Now, I don't know if you've been watching the news of late, but there is no way that I can host a show that focuses on Indigenous and non-Indigenous relations without touching on Senator Lynn Beyak. Now, if you're an Indigenous person, you're probably getting really frustrated. And if you're a non-Indigenous person, you might be getting really confused. So once again, the learning curve is going to try to help you understand what's going on. And this has been going on for a while, so I thought I'd start off today by walking you through a little timeline of what happened. So all of this started, first and foremost, Senator Lynn Beyak is from the Dryden area, the town of Dryden, and she was appointed to the Senate by Stephen Harper back in 2013. So last March of 2017, she really caused an uproar when she shared with the Senate that she believed residential schools were not all that bad. And she criticized the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So the quote is, "I speak partly for the record, but mostly in memory of the kindly and well-intentioned men and women and their descendants, perhaps some of us here in this chamber, whose remarkable works, good deeds, and historical tales in the residential schools go unacknowledged for the most part and are overshadowed by negative reports." So that happened in March 2017. That triggered an open letter to the senator by the Anglican Church. Now, this is one of the churches that actually ran residential schools. And to sum up their letter, they basically said there was nothing good about the residential schools. As an Indigenous woman, I really want to reiterate that, because that's one of those stereotypes or those misnomers out there that we really have to clarify. Those children may have received an education, but every single one of them was forcibly removed from their family. There are other ways to educate children. There was nothing good about that. The whole idea of the residential schools was to remove their Indigenous culture and teachings and replace it with a more European way of living and thinking. Those children were taught to hate their own language, to be ashamed of it, and ashamed of the color of their own skin. They were forbidden to speak their language, which caused problems when they finally got to go home, and that was during very limited time, summer break and maybe at Christmas. These children were not shown love, and they weren't even allowed to communicate with their other siblings, even if they saw them in the schools. I repeat, there was nothing good about the residential schools. And the Anglican Church was the first to come out and say that. Now, in April of 2017, she used to sit on the Senate Committee for Aboriginal Peoples. Because of her statement, she was removed from that committee, but at that time, she still sat as part of the Progressive Conservative Caucus. Now, at that time, that's when we hear Senator Beyak saying that she believed that was a threat to freedom of speech. And that's what we're focusing on today. In January 2018, just this month, you would have seen it in the news, that she was removed from the Progressive Conservative Caucus and now sits as an independent in the Senate. And in January 2018, just this week, both Anishinaabe Nation and Grand Council Treaty Number 3, agencies that represent huge treaty areas in this immediate area and just to the west, have called for her resignation. So what is all of this about, and how does it involve freedom of speech? That's what we're going to talk about today. Chantelle Bryson is here again. You met her earlier. She did a show previously about the inquest and helped us understand that. Today we're going to discuss freedom of speech in different locations. What does it mean when a senator says something like this? And what happens if you hear those kind of comments in a coffee shop or at your work? So as always, go grab a coffee, get in that comfy chair, and I'll see you back here in a few minutes as together you and I walk through the learning curve. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Learning Curve. Once again, I'm Sandy Boucher, and we're here with Chantelle Bryson. I'm going to make you a co-host if you're not careful. So, now last time we talked about your background, and I remember you chose to come to Thunder Bay because of the outdoor lifestyle, and you love it here, which is amazing. But I don't think I asked, and I always want to be very transparent with the viewers. So, are you Indigenous?
No, and I have met Indigenous friends who are as blonde and blue-eyed as me, who are, but no, I'm from Dutch and German immigrants.
Okay, awesome. And again, that's just nowadays.
Yeah,
like you said, not the stereotypical look. So, Senator Lynn Beyak has everyone talking about freedom of speech, and there's so many different misinterpretations. So, what is freedom of speech?
Right. Well, as we briefly spoke about last time, the only guaranteed right to freedom of speech is found in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 2, which is subject to reasonable limits in a free and democratic society. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
And there's a test that goes with that. So they're not absolute rights. And it only applies to government. So laws, actions of government, policies of government. So, for instance, a Senate sanction by the Senate would invoke the charter, the criminal code charge of hate speech would invoke a potential charter defense.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't apply to stores or the street corner or anything like that. And there may be other restrictions on those areas, but not an unqualified right to freedom of speech.
Okay. I think my Indigenous viewers just got very nervous, like, pardon what? Okay, so for example, and I know I mentioned locations, right? So let's talk about different scenarios that might happen. So, for example, say I'm an office worker. I work in an office, I'm at my little cubicle, and my coworker is spitting out, in my mind, horrific things, whether it's slanderous or whatever, racist against Indigenous people, or whether it's homophobic or whatever the case may be. So what could I do in that case if, this is baloney? Now, the charter's not going to apply unless I work for the government, right?
Right.
Okay. So what if I work for a private company? Is there anything that limits this?
There are a lot of things that limit it, actually. First would be your terms of employment upon hire, right? There may be things in there about things you can say and not say. And absolutely, in Ontario, the Occupational Health and Safety Act would apply in terms of a harassment-free workplace, a safe workplace. So employers have obligations under that to ensure that occurs and this behavior isn't permitted. Or someone can complain and you can have a Ministry of Labor investigation and orders. And of course, the Human Rights Act, or the Human Rights Code of Ontario, would also apply. It applies to workplaces. So employers have obligations, again, to prevent harassment and discrimination based on prohibited grounds, which include race, ethnic origin, color, etc. And so an employee could definitely make a complaint to the Human Rights Tribunal. They would mostly, go to their employer and have their employer rectify it through discipline up to and including dismissal of that person. So there are many, many limits in the workplace. And also the employer could have a social media policy, all kinds of things. So an employer is really not circumscribed in the conditions they can put upon you upon hire, unless those conditions are discriminatory.
Right, exactly.
But then the Occupational Health and Safety Act and the Human Rights Code would be the big ones.
So if I'm in that situation, I'm going to go to HR.
Yes.
Right? If my company's big enough to have an HR person.
Right.
Or
because employers are obligated under both acts to have policies, clear policies written on these matters, including investigations and remedies, and they have to follow those in order to protect themselves from liability.
Okay. So I'm thinking if there's no HR department, I'm going to go talk to my supervisor. If it's my supervisor saying it, then it's that person's supervisor and the usual chain.
Right. And if the employee is not satisfied with the response, they can most certainly make a complaint to the Ministry of Labor or to the Human Rights Tribunal.
Awesome. And to find that information, I'm going to assume we can Google it.
Absolutely. And they have many useful guides of, does this cover your situation? Human Rights Tribunal also has a legal support center where you can get some free advice on whether it covers your situation.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's workplace. Now you finish your work day and you head over to one of our amazing coffee shops here in Thunder Bay. I've had this happen where I'm sitting in a coffee shop and I'm minding my business and someone at the next table says something, and in this case, my case, it was nice and loud. They wanted to make sure that everyone in the place heard it, and they were talking about how they really just didn't want Indigenous people around.
Right.
And
the hair stands on end.
Right? Yeah. Challenging situation. You just wanted to have a relaxing coffee. So, and I'm certain, to be fair here, I'm certain there were non-Indigenous people in that cafe that were equally as uncomfortable. Right? Like, I mean, it wasn't just me. It was just, it made everyone in the place uncomfortable. So now we're talking a public establishment serving the public. So what plays in what happens here?
Well, unless it's the actual service provider, right, like an employee or the owner doing it, it probably would not invoke the Human Rights Code. And unless it rises to the level of the criminal code of willfully promoting hatred, which is a very high bar against an identifiable group, you're really limited in terms of going to management and the owner and asking them to have these people leave. And they certainly are able to do that. They can bar whoever they choose. They can't bar someone on prohibited grounds under the code because of their race, but they can certainly choose to bar people for other reasons, including, racist statements within their discretion. You can't make them do it. However, I think most public establishment owners would take some action in that regard. And then you see the scenarios of boycotts if people don't take appropriate action, of making it known and affecting change that way.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, if nothing was done, that's going to get around incredibly fast.
Media,
it's a small community.
Social media boycotts, and you see that happen from time to time. So,
awesome. So, wish there was a steadfast rule I could use in that one, but not.
I guess I would qualify too if you went to management or the owner and said, I want you to ask these people to leave, I want you to do something. If they just said, I'm not going to do that, they're probably okay. But if they went further and made their own, like, I agree with them, or discriminatory statements, then you could take them to task before the Human Rights Tribunal.
Because that's where we cross the line, right?
Because they are the public service provider. Right?
Awesome. Okay, next one. You touched on it, and we may or may not have to go to break here soon, but we can get into it. Social media. And this is so huge nowadays and so wide open. And I know I am constantly blocking, unfollowing people. It's insane. I like to be inclusive and bring people on as friends, but holy moly, some of the things they post. So is there any rules
Right.
In the land of Facebook.
Well, I think if it's someone who's a politician, or, they have ethical codes, they may breach. There may be things you could do there.
Oh,
right.
Never even thought of that
If
one.
they're a professional, they may have professional rules of conduct. You may be able to do something there. If it rises to the level of the criminal code and say the willful promotion of hatred against an identifiable group. Which again, you need the Attorney General consent to prosecute, but it's possible. But putting all those things aside, then you're down to the terms of use of the social media agencies. So whether it's Facebook or Twitter, and you can go to that and you can make a complaint. And they could remove someone from the service. They could just remove their content, or they could block them from using the service altogether.
I'm not sure if you know, and I didn't ask you about this beforehand, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but with that horrific Facebook group that was there, it was actually Facebook that eventually shut it down, wasn't it?
Right.
Yeah,
that's my understanding. Okay. Yeah.
So
and I believe there was a police investigation. As well, but again, reaching that criminal code level of willful promotion of hatred with the Attorney General's consent,
that's way up here.
It's big, and people can push for that because it is a discretionary call, and there have been successful cases under that provision. So the Keekster case back in 1990 of the high school teacher anti-Semitic remarks. They said that was constitutionally valid. Oh, wow. And they went through his free speech rights and said in that case, they did not win out the day, that this was a reasonable limit in a free and democratic society because what he was saying was not true.
Yeah, exactly.
Et cetera, right?
Okay.
And so it wasn't part of furthering democracy and good public debate, and he was convicted.
Wow. Okay, so we're running out of time here. So we are going to take a quick break. Go refill that coffee or water or whatever you have, and we'll be back in a few minutes to continue talking about freedom of speech with Chantelle Bryson. And welcome back to The Learning Curve. Once again, I'm Sandy Boucher, and we're here with Chantelle Bryson talking about the freedom of speech. So there's one more location, really stretching the definition here, that I wanted to talk about. And that's, I've heard of cases where you receive a message directly, whether they send you an email or it's through Messenger, and it's something horrific, but now it's not a general, it's targeted towards you. Right. So what's, if anything, limits that kind of situation?
So the charter right would only apply if it was a government person, right? Okay. And again, you could invoke their codes of conduct, or if it was a professional, their rules of conduct to try to, deal with the situation. Criminal code would not apply because that's limited to in public.
Oh,
willful promotion of hatred in public. The human, unless it was in the provision of a public service or employment, like say, or housing, say it was your landlord doing it, you could go to the Human Rights Tribunal. Okay. But if it was just a person to person outside of those scenarios, you're really quite limited. None of those things come into play. The tribunal doesn't come into play. The criminal code doesn't come into play unless it was repeated and rose to the level of criminal harassment.
Exactly.
But generally before that, and I think we've all had those experiences, like you said, where we just block people, right? We don't take their call, we block them on social media, and then if they persist through other methods at your workplace, then you get into the workplace stuff. So
exactly.
It's tricky. The one-on-one stuff is tricky. There's not a whole lot you can do.
So block, delete, and they showed you their true colors. Keep it in mind as far as I'm concerned. Personal opinion on that one. So it all depends on the situation. It depends on who's doing it, what location you're in. But I don't know, I think you would agree, talk to someone, ask, right? Don't assume that you can't do nothing.
That you can't do anything. Yeah. Because there are, and you know, even the Senate. The Senate has a code of ethics for ethics and conflict of interest, and there is there has been a request for an inquiry made, and the Senate can make a finding of suspension and even arguably removal. That hasn't been done. Every time they've gotten close to doing that, the person is resigned.
Yeah. Okay.
That would invoke the charter, and someone's, you know, subject to that sanction for something they said or published could review that to the federal court on freedom of speech and get into that test under the charter.
Okay. And that's one thing I did want to touch on. So we've done all these locations. I did want to bring it back just to one comment on Senator Beyak, or any senator in that point. So as I mentioned,
and the criminal code and the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, would all apply.
So I've mentioned that Nan and Treaty 3 have called for a resignation, and that's because she, as a senator, senators can't really be removed, right? Like I looked it up, and there was 5 reasons they can be disqualified. So fails to attend 2 consecutive sessions, becomes a subject or citizen of a foreign power, is declared bankrupt, that's pretty standard for a board of directors, is convicted of treason or a felony, or ceases to qualify for the property or residence restrictions.
So if you were, say, convicted for the willful promotion of hatred, you'd be removed.
Which would be a felony, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are legal opinions out there that the Senate itself, as the master of its own house, can, and they have suspended people of all pay and privileges. They did that to Senator Brazeau when he was charged but not convicted, right? He didn't challenge it. So they can do that. They have done that. And there are legal opinions out there because we have a preamble to our Constitution that says it's similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom, where similar things have been done. And so there are legal opinions out there that a majority vote of the Senate actually could remove a senator.
Oh, wow.
And they came very close to doing that with one particular senator who had not, had not breached the attendance rules. He'd show up once a session and then go to Mexico. And right before they were voting to remove him, he resigned. So it can be done. Would it be held up on review to the federal court? That's another question. Okay. And then there's also the application of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. And there was one case where it was tried against an MP who had made, sent out leaflets with anti-Indigenous content. And that case was lost because the tribunal found he was sending out the leaflets for his own benefit, not the public, to get reelected. A Senate would be different, right? Because they're not elected. So
they're appointed.
Whose benefit are they doing it for? The tribunal also found that with the MP's leaflets, it wasn't a public service because he did it. He didn't invite the public to participate. In the case of Senator Beyak, she has invited the public to participate, to give her letters to publish. So could a case be argued? Sure. But they couldn't remove her. They could just apply remedies under the Human Rights Act.
Wow. Okay, we're out of time.
It's complicated. Right? It's complicated.
Once again, we're throwing so much information at you. You're learning about the Senate and our government structures today, but we had a really good discussion on freedom of speech. And if there's the one thing I take hope from is, yes, these horrible things are happening, but they're encouraging us to have these conversations. And we're discussing what it feels like to hear those comments and what we want to do and the kind of workplaces and coffee shop environments that we want to have in our city for the enjoyment of all. So as always, take the information you learned today, share it with your colleagues, have that discussion around your dinner table, and together we can continue walking through the learning curve. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.